Friends, Season 1, Review. Script: when people talk about the greatest sitcoms ever made, one name always comes up: Friends. But what made this show so special wasn't just the jokes. It was the feeling of friendship, heartbreak, awkwardness, chaos, and those tiny everyday moments that somehow became unforgettable. And honestly, this early part of the show captures that magic perfectly. The episode starts with Ross completely broken after finding out that Carol left him. And not only left him, but also realized she was a lesbian. What makes this scene so iconic is how relatable Ross feels. He's dramatic, emotional, confused, and saying things that make absolutely no sense. But somehow, we still feel bad for him. One of the funniest moments is when Ross says he feels like someone pulled his small intestine out through his mouth and tied it around his neck. That line instantly tells you the kind of humor this show is going for: emotional pain mixed with ridiculous comedy. And then comes one of the most underrated jokes in the episode. Rachel randomly says, "Sometimes I wish I was a lesbian." The silence after that line is absolutely perfect. That's the genius of Friends. The comedy doesn't always come from punchlines. Sometimes it comes from awkward pauses, reactions, and the chemistry between the characters. Speaking of Rachel, this episode quietly shows the beginning of one of the best character journeys in sitcom history. At the start, Rachel is completely dependent on her parents. She has no job, no direction, and honestly no idea how the real world works. When she says, "I was getting married because I didn't want to live off my parents," it sounds funny, but it also reveals how lost she really is. And then Monica delivers one of the most iconic lines in television history: "Welcome to the real world. It sucks. You're gonna love it." That single line basically defines the entire show, because Friends is really about young adults trying to figure life out while pretending they know what they're doing. Now let's talk about Phoebe. Phoebe is absolute chaos, and that's why she's amazing. Her backstory is unbelievably dark. Her mother died, her stepfather went to prison, she lived with an albino guy who cleaned windshields, and somehow she still became the happiest person in the group. The funniest part is how casually she says all these traumatic things while everyone else just stares at her in shock. Phoebe feels completely unpredictable. You never know if she's about to say something wise or something absolutely insane. And honestly, she steals almost every scene she's in. Then there's Joey and Chandler, probably the most entertaining friendship in the entire series. Joey is lovable but unbelievably dumb, and Chandler uses sarcasm like it's oxygen. Their scenes feel so natural because they balance each other perfectly. Joey says something ridiculous. Chandler reacts with sarcasm, and somehow it never gets old. One of the best examples is Chandler getting trapped inside the ATM vestibule with Jill Goodacre. This entire sequence is comedy perfection. Chandler becomes so nervous that he can't even speak properly when he says, "Gum would be perfection." You can literally feel his embarrassment through the screen. And then things get even worse when he accidentally starts chewing someone else's gum. It's uncomfortable, it's awkward, and somehow, it's hilarious. That's classic Friends humor. Taking a tiny everyday situation and turning it into complete disaster. Another thing this episode does brilliantly is showing how different all six friends are. Monica is controlling and obsessive. Ross over-explains everything. Joey is clueless. Chandler hides emotions with jokes. Rachel is spoiled but trying to grow. And Phoebe exists on another planet entirely, but somehow, together they work perfectly. The Thanksgiving sequence especially proves this. Everything goes wrong, they get locked out, the turkey burns, everybody starts screaming at each other, and Monica completely explodes. But beneath all the chaos, there's something weirdly wholesome about it. Because this group isn't perfect. They argue constantly, they annoy each other nonstop. But at the end of the day, they still choose to stay together. That's why audiences connected so deeply with this show. It wasn't about perfect lives, it was about imperfect people finding comfort in each other. Even small moments become memorable. like Rachel learning how to do laundry for the first time. A normal sitcom would treat this like a basic joke, but Friends turns it into a character moment. By the end of the scene, Rachel standing up for herself over a laundry cart actually feels like a victory. It sounds ridiculous, but the show somehow makes it meaningful. That's what made the writing so smart. Even the smallest moments mattered because they represented growing up. And then there's Ross getting a monkey named Marcel. Only Friends could introduce a monkey into an apartment and somehow make it feel normal. The reactions from the group are priceless, especially Chandler instantly calling Ross pathetic for having a monkey instead of a roommate. The dialogue in this show feels incredibly fast and natural. Nobody waits for the perfect sitcom line. The characters interrupt each other, react instantly, and keep conversations moving naturally. That style made the show feel real. And honestly, that's why people still rewatch it decades later. Because even though the situations are exaggerated, the emotions feel genuine. Loneliness, fear of adulthood, career struggles, relationship problems, wanting to belong somewhere. Everybody relates to at least one character, and maybe that's the biggest reason why Friends became such a massive success worldwide. It wasn't just a comedy, it became comfort television, a place where viewers could escape into a world where no matter how bad life gets, your friends will still be there at the coffee shop waiting for you. And honestly, that feeling never gets old. Even after all these years, the jokes still land, the chemistry still works, and the emotional moments still feel real. That's incredibly rare for a sitcom. In the end, this part of Friends perfectly introduces everything that made this series legendary: the humor, the awkwardness, the emotional chaos, and most importantly, the friendship. And maybe that's why millions of people still keep coming back to it. Because deep down, everyone wants a group like this. A group that laughs at your worst moments but never leaves your side. And that's exactly why Friends remains timeless.